that delay. We were working on some conferees. And so on the agenda today, we have a couple of hearings, but first, bill introductions. Does anyone have a bill introduction?
Going once.
Seeing none, the offer stands for tomorrow. We will open the hearing on House Bill 2477. We'll call on Kyle Hamilton to give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So before diving into the bill, I'm just going to very quickly give some background information about the remediation program. And I'm just summarizing the annual report. You guys were, I think, sent a copy from the remediation board maybe a few hours ago. So the remediation reimbursement program was created to provide financial support to eligible persons through reimbursement of expenses that are incurred during the performance of remediation activities for releases of agricultural chemicals. So your fertilizers, your pesticides. To be reimbursable, the remediation activities must be approved by KDHE. In 2019, the legislature extended the sunset that's in place for this program to 2030. The Kansas Agricultural Remediation Fund is 100% financed by annual environmental fees, and those are assessed on commercial grain warehouses, agricultural chemical product registrants, commercial fertilizer product registrants, custom fertilizer blenders, and pesticide dealers. There's kind of an interesting mechanism that's in place for this program where if the balance that is in the fund equals or exceeds $3 million on April 1st of any year, the assessments are not levied on or after the next July 1st. So they just stop. But if the balance equals $1 million or less on April 1st of any following year, then the assessments start up again on and after the next July 1st. And so again, that program, it's administered by the board. And if any of you are thinking, this remediation, this seems very familiar to me, it might be because 2021, the legislature passed what was Senate Bill 31. That authorized the KDA to request an annual transfer from that existing fund, take $50,000 for a pesticide waste disposal program. And so that component of this overall remediation program is more on the front end. You know, if people have pesticide stored somewhere, it's old, it's not being used, the bill passed in 2021 just provided some funding so that could be cleaned up before it creates a mess. All right, so going to the bill, and someone needs help with remediation. So section 1 would amend KSA 23708. That's the statute that originally established the remediation and reimbursement program. The section would increase the maximum reimbursement from the Kansas Agricultural Remediation Fund from $200,000 to $300,000. The Kansas Agricultural Remediation Board, pursuant to rules or regulations, could set a maximum amount that is less than or equal to $300,000. If the property in question has been sold or leased and both the buyer and the seller or the lessee and the lessor are responsible for remediation, the total reimbursable amount for the site would be raised by the bill from $400,000 to $600,000. The Kansas Agricultural Remediation Board, pursuant to rules and regulations, again, it could set a maximum amount that is less than or equal to $600,000. And then section 2 would amend KSA 23710. That's the statute that lists the powers and duties of the Kansas Agricultural Remediation Board. Subsection E would be amended to increase the amount that's available to the board for administrative overhead expenses from $150,000 to $175,000. House Bill 2477 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. And with that, I'd be happy to take any preliminary questions.
Questions for Mr. Hamilton? Representative Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kyle. Going back to your preview, what was the number of that Senate bill that we passed in 21 that allocated that $50,000 transfer?
That was Senate Bill 38.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Kyle. Heather O'Hara, would you give us, there's a fiscal note to this, at least a fiscal, I guess a note, not necessarily a note like we think it is, but go ahead. Sing away.
Don't tempt me, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heather O'Hara, Legislative Research, looking at the fiscal note from the Division of the Budget. The Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Environment indicate that the passage of the bill would have no fiscal effect on agency operations.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Heather? Seeing none, okay, we will proceed with oral opponents. Boy, I want to get done quick. Oral proponents. First up, Kelsey Olson, Deputy Secretary of Agriculture. Do you want to do you have something to say? You don't have to say much, and we'll call Mr. Stuckey up next.
Perfect. I was expecting him to go.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Kelsey Olson. I serve as the Deputy Secretary at the Kansas Department of Agriculture. It's my pleasure to stand here in support of this bill that increases the funding of the reimbursement allowance. The Kansas Department of Agriculture does serve in an ex officio capacity in regards to the Kansas Agri-Mediation Board, and this is something that the board has discussed, and we are proud to be able to say that we support this these changes. As you can imagine, the last time this bill, this funding limit was set was in 2001. Since that time, the value of the dollar has decreased and is no longer able to go as far on the cleanup project. So we believe this is a positive thing for not only our retailers who are facing sites that need remediation, but something that the industry behind is very supportive of. So thank you, and I'd stand for any questions at this time or later.
Okay, thank you. We will hold off questions until everyone has presented orally, and just we want to make sure, so thanks, Kelsey. We'll call on Randy Stuckey from Kansas Grain and Feed, Kansas Agribusiness Retailers. He was kind of the one that we worked on bringing this bill together, and so he's a what? He's a bad guy? What? Oh, okay. All right. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Stuckey. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Randy Stuckey this afternoon, first time this year before the committee, on behalf of the Kansas Grain and Feed Association, and it's the grain elevators of the state of Kansas, and KARA, Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association, the ag retailers of the state of Kansas. So a great review of the bill, and we did work with the chairman on putting this bill together. The thrust of the bill is pretty straightforward, and it essentially what Kyle said it does. It increases the amount that any one facility owner can receive from this fund, this remediation fund, for cleanup of ag chemicals, nitrates and pesticide, nitrate fertilizers and pesticide products on their site, in the soil or the groundwater. Currently, it's $200,000 per site, and the bill would increase that to $300,000 per site, and that's per site, even if it's sold to another facility owner, which happens occasionally. That maximum would be transferred to the new owner, unless you have both the new owner and the old owner that are at the same time are still responsible for the cleanup project, and then that's the second portion of the bill that would allow it to be a maximum of now it's $300,000. That would be $600,000 per site if you have two people paying into it and then remediating the project. So step back a second about what this bill does, why it was created, or the act rather, why the act was created and what it intends to do and has done since 2021. In 2021, not 2021, 20 years ago, 2001 at this point, 2001, this bill was passed to stand up this program, and the target of the legislation at the time was a fumigant, carbon tetrachloride, that was used across the Midwest, really, where it was the fumigation product was a liquid that was put on the top of the grain silo that would percolate through the grain and then aerate back up and kill the insects. Well, if you put on too much liquid, it doesn't do that. It goes back down into the soil below the grain elevator. And you do that a little bit over a long period of time, and you end up having a problem. And not only with that, but as we found out through the years since, over the last 20-plus years, we didn't necessarily do the same type of handling for nitrate fertilizer in the 60s and 70s as we do today, where everything's required to be handled over a load pad at the facilities. And so if you spill a little bit of fertilizer over a long period of time, then you might have yourself in a situation where you've got nitrates in the soil below the facility and potentially the groundwater. This is the only program in the state of Kansas that allows, it's essentially a self-insurance program for those facilities that may not have $300,000 on hand to clean up a non-insurable remediation site. Our industry has supported this program, as has the state regulators and the EPA, heralded this program as it's a program where the industry pays into this fund and is able to, if they need to, pull out from the fund up to that statutory maximum. There's only 2 other programs, as I'm aware, like this in other states. So there's, it's pretty unique to the state of Kansas. It's not as if these problems don't exist in other states, these fumigants and nitrates in groundwater and soil below the facilities. But here in Kansas, we're taking the initiative to clean them up. And I think it's a bright spot, shining star on our industry and the state of Kansas. And we herald this program to both state and federal regulators whenever we have the chance. Problem is that $200,000, as was passed in 2001, doesn't, as was just mentioned, this certainly doesn't go as far as it did 23 years ago. So a $100,000 increase to move these projects along when needed would be very, I think, appropriate and necessary. So the way this works is that because people don't just sit on a pile of cash to maybe do a remediation project, normally an applicant to the fund will, so we have an ag retailer or a grain elevator, they conduct the remediation activities, they apply for remediation from the fund, they receive the remediation, and then take the next step in the process. And so this can be a multi-year process with multiple steps along the way of doing the work and receiving the remediation monies and then going forward. So this will help move those projects along that might not otherwise be able to. The second portion of the bill there in the back, as Kyle mentioned, was the board. It's a state board that has no employees. There's no employees, no FTEs attached to the board. And so they have various contracts. They pay monies every year to the Kansas Department of Agriculture for their fiscal office, helps receive the money because the money's attached to fees that the ag retailers and the grain elevators pay to the KDA. So they just portion that off and put it into the fund. So remuneration goes to the KDA for that. Also, the fund is audited every year. There's a fee that goes along with that contract. And then they have a contract with the Kansas Grain and Feed Association to help administer that contract. They review the applications for legal sufficiency and then carry out the acts of the board. So together, those fees add up, and this just gives some more leeway for carrying out the increased expenses for those fees. That's a lot, but I wanted you all to know about what the program does in this fund, because it's an important program for the state of Kansas. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd certainly stand for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stuckey. We'll hold for just a moment here. We have a couple more. Up next, Shana DeGroot from Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. She will be representing not only COG, but the Soybean Association, Kansas Grain Sorghum Producers, and the Kansas Soybean Association. So we have a new one.
Yes,
we have a
like
newbie
Randy,
here.
This is my first time ever testifying, so I'm excited to be here today.
All right, so welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and the members of the committee for the opportunity to address the Kansas Commodity Organization's views on House Bill 2477. Our organizations represent members that are often either stakeholders in agriculture retailers and grain elevators or customers of one. Therefore, it is in the best interest of our organizations to ensure that these industries are healthy and that existing public law is updated to be the most effective. The Kansas Commodity Organizations support House Bill 2477. Since 2001, the agricultural, retail, and grain elevator industries have paid into the Ag Chemical Remediation Fund and Program, which acts as a form of self-insurance for the industry to help them clean up ag chemicals like pesticides or nitrate and phosphorus fertilizers. These industries need the fund as insurance will not cover these projects and they tend to be large and expensive. The current program allows for reimbursement of costs up to $200,000 per site. House Bill 2477 would increase the maximum reimbursement allowance to $300,000 per site. This bill would provide numerous benefits to the agriculture industry and surrounding community, two of which have direct links to our represented farmers. First, these projects are extremely expensive. Projects that are more expensive than the cap directly reduce the bottom line of agriculture retail and grain companies, which reduces the patronage. Secondly, cleaning up sites that are contaminated with chemicals is in the best interest of the whole community. These funds will be invested into making their communities a safer and better place to live. In conclusion, the Kansas commodity organizations continue our longstanding commitment to the health of the agriculture industry, of which agriculture retailers and grain elevators are an essential part. This bill would provide significant relief to our partners as they would be able to better withstand costly projects and complete the projects using the enhanced reimbursement. We encourage the committee to favorably pass this important piece of legislation.
Very good, thank you. Stand by for questions at the end if there are any for you. Thank you so much. And up next is Shahira Stafford, on behalf of the Kansas Cooperative Council. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everything has really been said, so I will just be standing here. Shahira Stafford on behalf of the Kansas Co-op Council. Our agricultural co-ops, both our grain elevators and our ag retail co-ops, also pay into the ag remediation fund, which is why we did want to stand up and say that we support House Bill 2477. We feel like this is just paying ourselves back for monies that we've been paying in year after year to protect Kansas groundwater and soil. So I will leave it at that and stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, committee, you've heard testimony by 4. I guess there's anyone else wanting to testify in favor of the bill that is not on my list? Seeing none, questions. Who has questions? Representative Moser?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and anyone can answer. What is the fee that's paid by the co-ops per year to be in this, and does it fluctuate by size of co-op? That kind of.
I have the statute at hand here, I think. It was actually amended in 2019, and the reason why it was amended was because it was when it was first set up, as I said, the thrust of the fund was really to address carbon tetrachloride in the state. And so at the time, about half of the fund was every year and annually was financed by the grain elevators. And obviously the other half would be pesticide dealers and nitrogen fertilizer custom dealers and fertilizer registrants. And as we've moved along, that's probably more like a 30-70 split now on who's receiving from the fund, 30% being those grain fumigant facilities. And the balance being mostly nitrate fertilizer. Did you have that, Sharon?
I'm pulling up the statute right
It's in 23713. Kyle, you got that right?
Though it's not just one fee for each type of entity. It's a list of different entities with a different amount per entity. So it's an annual assessment, for instance, of $100 by each custom blender, $40 for each commercial fertilizer required to be registered, and then it goes down the line.
So the folks that pay in, it's the grain elevators, one category. Pesticide dealers, they have a dealer's license, the KDA. Custom fertilizer blenders, there's a blender license from the KDA. Both fertilizer product registrants and pesticide product registrants. Every product they want to sell in the state has to be registered to the KDA. There's a fee attached, and a portion of that fee goes to the fund. Seems like I'm forgetting one. But that's essentially what we're talking about.
Representative Hsu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I understand the self-insurance part of it. Do you guys run into, or is there like a self-policing part of it too, if you get repeated bad actors, or maybe that's even ungenerous, of just like repeated negligence maybe of the same person a couple times happening?
Yeah, so the reason why these are generally non-insurable events is because they're not active spills. It's not a truck that turned over or a pipe that burst. These are legacy sites that actually many times the company that may have owned the facility for years and years. The only reason they actually found the contamination is because they were going through a purchase or a buyout, and the company that's buying the property wants to know what it is they're buying. And so it's not a line of bad actors. In fact, the folks that are footing the bills for these projects generally are new purchasers of the properties, but for the fact that there was a merger or a buyout, we wouldn't have identified the contamination or remediated the project. So there are companies that have a lot of applications, but they're the ones that are growing and purchasing the properties and doing the cash out of pocket to remediate the property. So that's kind of how it flows.
Other questions? EPA, are they involved in any of this? I hate to use that other word, Superfund, but I'll go there because maybe talk about that, how that would because these could be long-standing harmful chemicals. So is that kind of who the overseer is? I mean, does EP get involved in any of these, or who else? Where does it stop, I guess?
So certainly it's on their radar, and not just in Kansas, but throughout the Midwest. And we're fortunate, I think, that we work closely with the KDHE, and they look at nitrates and soil and groundwater related to agriculture across the state of Kansas and other municipalities with water treatment centers. But they will, I think, tell you, and we've talked to them, and they see this fund as something that's a net positive for the state of Kansas. It does not exist in all but 2 other states. But for this fund, there may not be the monies on hand to remediate these properties. So clearly it's a net positive for agriculture, focusing on those agricultural sites, agribusiness sites, and cleaning up our facilities. But we've had the EPA, the Region 7 administrator to Kansas on other, for our association, CARA and KGFA, for other purposes, and we're able to talk about this program. They weren't aware of it, but they certainly said this was a great spot for the state of Kansas to be. And also mentioned that there is a current overview of how KDHE, the state of Kansas, deals with water quality issues in the state. For a long time, we've been approached or worked through a narrative approach with Region 7 EPA, and they're looking at that program again to see exactly if there needs to be any changes to it or what it is that the state is doing. And this is, again, something we can point to and say, hey, look, for the ag sector, more than $20 million in the last 20 years has gone from the industry to back into cleaning up those sites. That's a great thing for us to be able to point to and say Kansas is taking care of business.
Very, very good. Other questions? Representative Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, as the testimony kind of indicates to me, this is commercial, this is a remediation available to commercial operations that are storing rain, selling nitrogen products and so forth. Does any of this apply to end user or for farmers that are that might run into a long-term storage of chemicals or fertilizer contamination problem?
That's a great question. One thing I had not touched on, I was debating whether or not to mention it, but in fact, when the bill was initially passed, the law was put in play, most of this is in fact geared toward businesses, but farmers can access the fund directly up to $10,000, and I imagine those would probably be an active line blowout or a truck turnover. And we've actually had one of those in recent years where there was a truck that turned over. I think it was either chemical or fertilizer, and when the first responders showed up to clean it up, they put water on it, got into the ditch, and ran off into the neighbor's property, and so it caused a lot of uninsurable loss. And so the fund was able to help that person out with remediating or giving them some of the money back to help cover the costs of remediating that project. So yes, up to $10,000, and I don't think anybody would be against if that needed to be looked at to be increased, but producers don't pay directly into the fund, and so it is limited to what they can receive out of it. Yep.
Can I have another question then? Is this just limited to like pesticides and fertilizer, or does this include other things like, well, we had a problem back when I was younger of DDT, but also, you know, things like atrazine or glyphosate that might have been stored on a farm and there's some long-term contamination from that. Would those things be covered as well?
If they're not insurable, certainly they would. And so a couple things here. One, for any pesticide would qualify for the fund. It didn't have to be, I just used fumigation as an example, but yeah, any agrochemical, so any type of agricultural chemical, fertilizer, or pesticide would apply. And if it's an agribusiness, it directly applies to the larger caps, and then on farm, it would be that $10,000 piece. But I will also mention that what Kyle mentioned before was in 21, when we stood up the pesticide waste disposal fund, or maybe not stood it up, but funded it out of this program. The program is run through the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and it's specifically intended for those types of situations where a farmer has old chemicals stored on site. My grandpa had an old refrigerator full of chemicals, and I think most farms do. And you don't want to just pitch those. You don't want to see them just pitched into the ravine. You want those to be taken care of appropriately. And up to $50,000 a year from this fund, the board has the authority to transfer to the KDA for that pesticide waste disposal fund. And for the last 2 years has done so. I think they intend to do so going forward. And so that's a great fund specifically for that purpose. Farmers can reach out to the KDA, say, hey, I've got these things, don't really know what they are necessarily, and that fund will help you take those off your hands and then dispose of them consistently with what EPA requires.
Okay.
Senator Minix, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you, Randy. Is there any provision in this bill for public notice? This is held within the Department of Agriculture. Someone comes forward with an application. Is the public aware of that?
Of each application that comes to the board?
Or that there's a contamination within that area?
That's a good point. All these sites to be reimbursable first have to be, the corrective action has to be approved by or directed by the KDHE. So if there's a public notification, it might happen at that stage, but I'm not sure that it is. Okay, I'm gonna thumbs up over here from my friends with the KDHE, so yes.
Okay. I know through the Department of Ag, if someone wants to renew a confined animal feeding operation permit, that requires such and such public notice for everybody to know. But I was just curious about this from KDHE. If I can catch an answer there, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. If you would, and state your name for the record, please.
Hi, I'm Kate Gleason. I'm Deputy Director of Environment at KDHE. So the sites that are in our oversight programs for cleanup, there are, certain points at which there are triggers for public notice and public processes. So it kind of depends on which program these sites are in. So I can't give you a very specific answer, but there are, interface points for the public to be aware of the contamination and the cleanup plans and the corrective action that will be taken at those sites.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Representative Seibert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the information. Just out of curiosity, used to be you could take these Roundup totes and chemical totes and the co-op would take them back and stuff. Now they're not, so farmers are storing them on their deal, and I got a pretty good pile of them myself. What do we do with them?
Who wants to attack that one? All right.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we actually do work with the ag recycling organization that takes those mini bulk totes back, and I think anybody at your grain facilities or ag retailers would be able to do that, or just call us and we'll be able to hook you up with the folks that they have trucks that come around. I think they're out of another state, but they have trucks that they contract with that go around and do those as a collection point, and certainly want to get those picked up and recycled.
Okay. Last call for question. Anything else? Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Probst, sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Randy, do you have, the increase is for the commercial part of this, and then there was some conversation about the disposal fund and the individual where farmers can use it. Inflation's comprehensive. I mean, it hits everybody. Do we need to talk about increasing those funds as well? I mean, the amounts that we're willing to put into that? If you have a $50,000 disposal fund, do we need to look at increasing that? If we have $10,000 per farm incident, do we need to look at increasing that?
So the $50,000 piece was just passed 2 years ago. So that's kind of recent. And they're still trying to stand up that program. So KDA has about $100,000, give or take, already. They have certainly enough demand on that program. It's just getting the contractor situation worked out, I believe, is the issue. So that's probably sufficient. The $10,000 for the farmers, we haven't had enough of those to know, how big those projects are and if that needs to be increased. But again, we wouldn't say no to it probably if there was a reasonable increase, request to do that.
We probably do have records of that, though. Like the truck incident that you described, we probably have a record of what it costs to remediate that one-off. And if we looked at those, we'd probably get a sense of whether we're bumping up against the edge of that, right?
Well, everything's relative. It's what did the one site entail, and if it's just a line that blows out for we're talking about a larger producer has on-farm storage of tanks of chemical, and they have an anhydrous tank line burst or a pesticide line burst or a truck turnover. It's I don't know. It's all relative on how big that project was to clean up, and so we're talking about each specific one. We haven't really had enough of them, I would think, to know is it sufficient or not. And just using the one example might not be enough to know.
Okay.
But it's $10,000, and this is about $1 million in and out every year in this fund. So we're not talking about a huge impact even if we wanted to double that to $20,000.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Last call. Sorry about that. I even had you wrote down, so I didn't mean to do that. Okay. All right, well, yes, you do. The proponent, written only, we do have Kate Gleason, who's acting bureau chief for the Bureau of Environment Remediation, which we just heard from her as well, from KDHE. We have no opponents or neutral that I am aware of. Anyone here to testify opposed or neutral to this bill? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2477. We will now open up the hearing on House Bill 2525, and we'll call on Mr. Hamilton once again. And if you think back not just a few months ago, you will say, man, this sounds very familiar.
It's true, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2525 actually contains the contents of 2023's HB 2159. And so House Bill 2159, it was heard here in this committee on February 13th of 2023. The committee recommended the bill be passed out on February 16th. And then by the end of the month, the bill ended up being stricken from the House calendar by House Rule 1507 because it wasn't blessed or sent back to the committee. So we are starting over again through House Bill 2525, but I'll revisit my brief really quickly. So under current law, KDHE has the authority to regulate salt solution mining, underground storage of natural gas, embedded salt, and liquid petroleum gas and hydrocarbons. Starting on page 2, line 37 of the bill, some language that required the Secretary to adopt rules and regulations by 2003, that's been stricken as a technical cleanup. And then on page 3, line 9, the Secretary would be required to adopt rules and regulations to establish fees for underground injection control well, Class 1 wells. And so you can see those fees listed there for starting in line 12. It's $6,500 per active hazardous waste injection well, $4,500 per active non-hazardous waste injection well, or $1,000 for any hazardous or non-hazardous waste injection well in monitoring or inactive status. And again, that's the maximum cap. The actual amount could be set lower in the rules and regulations. The Secretary would be required to provide a reduction in such fees for facilities already subject to fees under subsection D. in Section 1. Additionally, the Secretary would be required to adopt rules and regulations to establish fees for Class 5 wells. Such Class 5 wells well fees could not exceed $2,000 per well, and no fees could be established for small capacity sanitary septic systems. Monies collected from those fees would be credited to the Subsurface Hydrocarbon Storage Fund, which is used to cover the costs of regulating underground injection control wells. Under current law, fees collected from water well contractors, the certification of operators of water supply systems, and wastewater treatment facilities are credited to the state general fund. Sections 2 through 4, that's pages 3 through 6, would amend the relevant statutes to have such fees credited to the Water Program Management Fund instead. Expenditures from the fund are restricted to the purposes that are listed in the bill on page 4, line 9, and that's current law. None of that part's changing. House Bill 2525 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. And with that, I'd be happy to take any preliminary questions.
Thank you, Kyle. Again, what this is the exact bill we passed out last year. There was no changes made. We just had to put it into a new number. So any questions, folks want a refresher? All right, thank you, Kyle. Heather, again, would you give us a quick briefing on the fiscal note?
Heather O'Hara, Legislative Research. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The fiscal note prepared by the Division of the Budget on House Bill 2525 states that KDHE estimates the bill would increase fee fund revenue by $297,000 in fiscal year 2025 and $300,000 in fiscal year 2026, excuse me, due to new fees established in the bill, as well as rerouting the fees deposited in the state general fund from the program fees, or fee funds, excuse me. The agency also anticipates a reduction of $92,000 in state general fund revenues as a result of the rerouting of fees. KDHE expenditures are not anticipated to change with the enactment of the bill, as all associated regulated programs are existing, and it does not change program operations. Any fiscal effect associated with the bill is not reflected in the FY 2025 Governor's Budget Report. The Kansas Association of Counties estimates the bill would not have a fiscal effect on counties, but the League of Kansas Municipalities estimates that the bill could increase in expenditures for cities that own an underground injection control Class 1 well.
Thank you very much. Very good. Okay, and it's close to Groundhog Day, so we'll kind of relive that with those who voted last year. So we'll call on Tom Stiles, the Bureau Director for the Bureau of Water for KDHE. Stiles, welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Tom Stiles. I'm Director of Bureau of Water out of KDHE. As Kyle indicated, and what our testimony reflects, this is a bit of deja vu for most of the members of the committee. It mimics the language from last year's House Bill 2159, which the committee had passed out, but it languished on the floor and never got over the line at the end of the session. What the bill does, in simple terms, it allows the Secretary to formulate and establish fees for underground injection control wells that are of Class 1 nature or Class 5, and I'll describe those in a moment. It does place caps on those fees so that they are not open-ended, and it recognizes that some of the facilities that own Class 1 wells are already being charged fees for either Class 3 underground injection control wells or their underground hydrocarbon storage, which have been the workhorse for our geology program for a number of years. It also then directs that revenue that is raised from fees established on certified operators for both water and wastewater facilities be rerouted from the State General Fund into KDHE's Water Management Fund, and that similarly license fees that we charge for water well drillers and their rigs similarly be rerouted from the state general fund into our water management fund, where we can apply them to the programs that we are charged with administering in that situation. Motivation for the bill is threefold. It does increase revenues that allows us to be able to keep up with the growing demand for a variety of these geologic and certified operator and water well programs. It stabilizes the source there, given that the rerouting of the money from the state general fund back into the program fund allows us to, again, adequately support the certified operator program and the water well drilling licensing program. But probably job number one for the bill is to put an end to the subsidization of those programs by the underground hydrocarbon storage fees, which again have been the workhorse for all our geologic programs, but do not necessarily translate to fees that were imposed on owners of the underground UIC Class 5 or Class 1 wells. The Underground Injection Control Program resides within the federal Safe Drinking Water Act, and it basically manages the injection of fluids into the subsurface. Class 1 takes waste streams and injects them deep to the point where they'll never come back to the surface. You typically know this as our injection of brines into the Arbuckle Formation. Class 5 wells, that's not just brines, but they're for certain situations, pretty much any waste stream that really has no purpose and no chance of being remediated on the surface of the environment, to basically dispose of them for eternity. Class 5 allows fluids and waste to be disposed of in more shallow depths. Wichita's Aquifer Storage and Recharge Project is a Class 5 situation. So is the City of Laken's disposal of waste streams from their water treatment process that they use to remove uranium from the Ark River, et cetera. Both those programs to date have never had any generation of fees to support the programs, and yet dominate a lot of staff time and attention toward what we have to do that. And there again, the UHS, the hydrocarbon storage fees, have stepped in to provide that. This bill is an attempt to rebalance the book, so to speak, and allow more direct imposition of fees on those other types of projects. This is really about over the last 5 or 6 years, this is our fourth run at this bill in this language there. And each year we tend to make it a little bit farther down the road. We've engaged a number of the external associations that have had an interest in it, ranging from the municipalities to rural water to certainly our industries that are in the hydrocarbon industry and have spent millions of dollars in storing hydrocarbons and then the associated brines they use to displace the product for reentry of the product into the marketplace, and at times have to dispose of those brines appropriately through UIC Class 1 type of wells. The support there has been pretty much universal and unanimous, but there were conditions to that support. First off, the associations that want to support this bill insist that the fees be tied into supporting the regulatory programs directly related to those projects for which the fees were being levied. They need the fees to be capped. And that recognizing that, again, the Class 3, the salt, which are the salt solution mining operations that inject water into salt formations and then extract the salt out to either create salt caverns or process the salt brine into table salts and road salt, et cetera, as a industrial commodity. be given relief from the fees that would be imposed by this bill so that they aren't paying twice for the services that are being rendered by KDHE. Everyone that sees fees being directed out of KDHE want to make sure that the end game is improved service and benefits provided by our regulatory oversight and management of their respective facilities and their permits, and that we appropriately turn around permit renewals on a timely basis to keep them out of jeopardy in terms of compliance issues. And then finally, we agreed that we would impose the fees gradually out over time. In fact, the fiscal note that Heather briefed the committee on is probably a little optimistic with some revenues coming in state fiscal 25, when in fact, I think optimistically, the earliest we would see these new fees arrive at KDHE will be in state fiscal 26. We understand and we continue to look at processing, updating the regulations to process the necessary requirements to improve that service. And again, recognizing that we're seeing a lot more demands being placed on the programs, whether across the board, all three programs. The need for updating our certification testing for our operators, the need to have similar training for water well drillers so that they conduct their business but don't jeopardize the underlying groundwater and keep wells in place that are stable. And then certainly for our geologic management programs, whether it's the underground hydrocarbon storage program or our underground injection control program, that with all the variety of things that are potentially being put forth that potentially we would put into the ground, ranging from the classic brines to more hazardous substances to hydrogen to potentially at some point carbon dioxide or carbon products. All those things are starting to build out the complexity and the need for us to maintain a robust management program to regulate those types of activities, as well as stay on top of the data necessary to understand compliance and be able to manage the data so that we can effectively manage the resources that are being protected. Those include the environment up on the surface, the overall public health of our citizens, and then the integrity of our groundwater for subsequent generations to use for both domestic, industrial, and irrigation usages. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for any questions, but I want to reiterate that KDHE soundly supports, again, House Bill 2525.
Thank you, Tom. Questions for Mr. Stiles? You did a great job explaining it. Oh, wait a minute. Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Tom, for doing this. I know a lot of that stuff goes in the Arbuckle, but some of these other fluids that you mentioned, what kind of depth, does that vary as to where they're pumped down into?
Certainly does. It depends on the type of material that's being pumped down and whether you ultimately want to recover it. Certainly the fluids we put into our salt caverns will go down 300-400 feet. Arbuckle, we're in the thousands of feet down there, and there are a variety of other formations that we potentially would place some of these waste streams in there as well. So it at the extreme, it'll be 100 plus feet down to several thousand feet down for these types of injection fluids.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to ask you what you thought the reasoning was for this bill being introduced so many times and not passing. I mean, it seems like our leadership must either be opposed to the bill or they just don't think it's a big priority. Have you actually discussed it with our legislative leadership and gotten their opinion?
Not directly, no, sir. Our feeling is that it's a somewhat, the programs that are supported by it are somewhat complex, and I think you're correct that it hasn't risen up to the necessary priorities to put forth. But with each year, we've gained more and more momentum that I think you will hear from the industries that would see these fees imposed upon them. I think from their perspective, I think they've reached the critical mass point where they no longer want to see the fees that they are charged for underground hydrocarbon storage be used for other programs that lie outside the UHS program as well. And recognizing again that KDHE stands as the most rational agency to regulate their requirements under both state law as well as the federal Safe Drinking Water Act. We have just over time built momentum toward this. So I think it's just been circumstantial that we have, but it's a fairly arcane, narrow niche type of issue that doesn't generate a lot of enthusiasm across the entire legislative body.
Well, my question would just be, how do you know that you have momentum for the bill if you haven't asked the opinion of the people who are responsible for putting it on the House floor?
Well, as I said, each year we've made it a little bit farther in trying to essentially educate the legislative body. We leave it to the chair of the committees to discuss where these things lie in terms of once they reside on the floor of the House or the Senate to proceed forward. And then the legislative will be what it may as such. We have always introduced these types of bills at the committee level, and that's where our first engagement with the legislature has been more so. And then we just take our lead from the chairman of the associated committees.
Okay, other questions? Representative Minix.
Thank you, Tom. You referenced City of Lake and nanofiltration water, and that uranium is put down into the Arbuckle about how deep?
Well, out there, probably the 7,000 feet down because of the overall elevation of the state. As we go from east to west, it gets farther and farther from the underlying geology there. So it's probably some of the deepest injection.
So the uranium's collected from the Ark River watershed, filtered out and put back down 6,000 plus feet deep. The city of Lakeland would be charged $6,500 according to this bill. Is that a one-time charge or an annual charge?
That'll be annual.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
One point. Actually, Lakeland has a class 5 well with that operation, so they would at most be charged $2,000.
Okay, other questions? All right, seeing none, we'll retain the right to, oh, I'm sorry, Representative Jacobs.
And actually, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this might go to Kyle. if
Hey,
that's okay. Well, I'd hate to flush my opportunity down to ask a question, but is there a definition for page 3? I mean, in my own mind, I already know, but is it defined in this bill? Definition for page 3, starting in line 20, where we begin the word "but," in no case shall such fees be established for small capacity sanitary septic systems. Are we calling that household systems, and is it identified here in this bill? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I don't have an immediate answer to that question, but I can look into it, and the conferee might have a response.
Tom, you got an answer for that?
Individual septic systems and such are not class 5 operations, so they would be totally exempt from this bill. It was never our intent to go down to the household level.
Mr. Jacobs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going forward, would you put that definition in the bill to make it more narrow for the people?
The agency has no objection. We've encountered this concern in past sessions as well, and I thought we had tried to put in a prohibition to make it clear that we were not going to be dealing with individual septic systems and such. But if it helps clarify the lines on the road of which we won't cross, there'd be no objection from the agency.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Jacobs, would you like to work with Revisor Hamilton on a possible amendment to this?
I would be delighted, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We're planning on working this on Thursday. Okay, thank you, Tom, appreciate it. Also, we have testifying as a proponent, Michael Gillespie, Director of Government Relations for One Oak. Mr. Gillespie, thanks. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Michael Gillespie, Director of Government Relations for One Oak. In lieu of the time and me trying to get to a kindergarten program for Kansas Day, I'll try to be brief. Do we have a raise of hands? Who wants to hear the full testimony, or can I just hit the highlights? Okay, it looks like we're just hitting the highlights. So Tom did a good job of focusing on what industry agreed to, along with working with the agency. We have a good working relationship with the KDH&E, but the main things we wanted to focus on were, one, there were caps on the fees for the injection wells. But if you look at page 3, I believe it's line 16, it says, and then this is where the Secretary shall provide a reduction of fees for facilities already subject to fees under subsection D. As Tom mentioned multiple times, the workhorse that has been paying for all these programs and the UIC program over the years has been an underground hydrocarbon storage fee. One Oak annually pays around $200,000 a year to this fee that then pays for the UIC, parts of the UIC program. And while there are roughly 4 or 5, I believe, underground hydrocarbon storage entities, companies that are paying into this, but there are 5 times that, the number of underground injection control programs or companies, organizations that are using underground injection wells. So that subsidization is where we lie on making sure that it can be UIC pays for UIC, underground hydrocarbon storage pays for underground hydrocarbon storage. And so we're more than fine with the fees to industry for the UIC program. We think it's good to have a very good, stable program for regulating us, but also making sure that for the long haul, we have been subsidizing this program for years. And so I hope that we can get away from that. To Representative Fairchild's question on why hasn't this moved anywhere? Well, we had a really good bill. We're moving it forward. We could say it's close to the governor's office, and COVID happened. And so nothing got passed other than just making sure the budget was done to then get out of the building. So when you get to that point, it's like, well, we can't really do anything about that. But also there's legislative priorities, as you know and I know. Some years some issues get more strength, some issues don't. And so we decided to make sure that if we can reduce the subsidization of this program, make sure that our industry is paying the fair amount of fees for a fair amount of regulation, that we can take care of that. And so we'd hope that this has some timeliness, meeting legislative deadlines, move it forward, and would happy to add that amendment, Representative Jacobs. It doesn't matter to me as far as that specific thing, but if that helps you with the bill, we're more than happy to add that to it. We'd be favorable of that amendment as well. But I think it's time we get this done. There's no reason it shouldn't be done and taken care of the UIC program properly, and so we'd be supportive of this bill and be happy for any questions you all have.
Question, Mr. Gillespie? And I do apologize. I think I told you I was going to do this one first, and I do apologize. I forgot. But
Don't worry about it.
So, any other questions?
I did hear you say you're working at Thursday, so that sounds good enough for me.
Go ahead. Oh, Representative, long day. Shing sleeping. Got it. Nailed it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've been talking over in the House Energy Committee, not now, but last session, about hydrogen storage, for example, if hydrogen production takes off in the state. Am I right to say that this bill is relevant to that potential industry as well, or are we talking about something different? We're talking about hydrocarbons.
When you're talking about the underground injection control, that would not be where we're talking about hydrogen. Underground hydrocarbon storage, salt storage, could be a place where they're talking about hydrogen storage, but that would be far beyond what I have the expertise to talk about, nor on behalf of One Oak. But I think that is some consideration, but that wouldn't be with the UIC program. I think people are continuing to understand the true value of underground salt storage and how great it is, how stable it is. And so if there is any growth in either underground storage or injection, I think having both separate regulatory regimes to take care of those, I think is important. So I can't touch on hydrogen too much, but I do think that that's a good clarification. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are there other proponents to this bill? I don't have any down. I don't see any. And we have no written only. And we have no neutrals. And we do have one neutral written only. That is Wendy Stark with the League of Kansas Municipalities. So that will be in your files, committee members. And I see no one speaking in opposition. Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2525. Just tell them to give you a pass and they can give the ticket to me. I haven't had one for a couple of weeks, so it's important. Kindergartner, first big program, it's a big deal. Okay, committee, Dana emailed copies of the annual reports for the Kansas Agri-Mediation Board, so you should have that in your email, as well as also there are other reports from groundwater management districts, I believe, have been out over the last few days. If you have not seen them, if not, they will be coming. Tomorrow we will have a briefing and hopefully a deep discussion of the Kansas dairy industry, and we'll have some dairy farmers here, as well as talk about a proposal the industry wants for a new dairy research center at Kansas State University. So bring your questions, and also there are a couple of ag-type lunches tomorrow. We will have the Rural Caucus. We're going to reorganize, getting a couple weeks late start, but it will be, I don't know, they moved it on. Is it down over here, just across? No, it's down the other end. 152 South? Okay. So, and the dairy industry also we're providing that. So we do have Call ice cream, as well as a nice lunch, and I believe milk by the glass, in glass containers from a Kansas dairy producer. And also, if you want to go across the way, our good friends at the Kansas Agricultural Alliance over at the Maitre D, soup and sandwiches, and a good thing, we kind of miscommunicated on our days. But anyway, the Rural Caucus, so you can go have that as well, or have both, I don't care. But at the beginning of the Rural Caucus, we will do a reorganization and have election of officers. Yes. The Ag Alliance, the Kansas Agricultural Alliance lunch across in the basement. Like normal, like it used to be.
I couldn't remember where it was, sorry.
Old school. Okay. Well, old Hayden High for some that have been around longer than others. Okay. So, and then on Thursday, we will also have another hearing, and then we will work these two bills. That is the plan as of now. So if you do have amendments, work with Kyle. With that, we are adjourned.